In 2024, an auction house in Polanco was preparing for a special sale of vintage items. Among the lots, a collection of antique cameras recovered from a storage unit in Roma Norte stood out. Employees meticulously cataloged each piece. Polaroids from the 80s, 35mm cameras and camcorders from various eras. It was then that they found a high-8 camcorder that still had a tape inside. Protocol dictated that any existing content be reviewed to determine if it added value to the lot. They expected to find typical family recordings, birthdays, weddings, a baby's first steps. What they discovered sent a chill down the spine of the employee conducting the review. The first images showed a seemingly normal school trip in Chapultepec Park dated June 6, 1991. But the last 40 minutes of the video captured something horrifying. The exact moment when 25 teenagers were guided towards vehicles by men dressed as park rangers. The employee, born and raised in Mexico City, felt a dreadful sense of familiarity in those images. And then he remembered. The largest mass disappearance in the history of the federal district. A case his own mother had told him about when he was a child. A cautionary tale about the dangers of trusting strangers, even those in official uniforms. 25 middle school students who left one June morning for an educational field trip and never returned home. That home video, lost for 33 years among forgotten objects, not only captured the last moments of freedom for 25 teenagers in Mexico's most iconic park, but it also revealed how Chapultepec, the city's green lung visited by millions, became the stage for a human trafficking operation so audacious that authorities preferred to deny it rather than admit such a thing could happen in the very heart of the capital. If you have ever been on a school trip to Chapultepec or taken your own children there, this story will shake you to your core. Subscribe and activate all notifications because what this video revealed about Mexico's most visited park will change your perspective forever. Like this video so more people can learn about this forgotten case. Located in one of Iztapalapa's most populous areas, Técnica 47 was a technical school that served the children of laborers, merchants, and office workers. It was not an elite institution, but it had a fine reputation for its discipline and dedication. The teachers, many of whom lived in the same neighborhood, knew each student and their family. The three-story building, painted in the characteristic institutional green, housed nearly 800 students in 2 shifts. Professor Ernesto Ramirez, 42 years old, taught history and geography during the morning shift. Originally from Xochimilco, he had been teaching for 15 years and was known for his devotion. He organized annual field trips as a reward for the students with the best grades, a tradition he had started 5 years earlier. It was his way of showing the kids that hard work paid off, that the world was bigger than the streets of Iztapalapa. The top students would visit museums, historical sites, places many of them would otherwise never see. In 1991, he decided to take them to Chapultepec Park, combining a visit to the castle and the zoo with a picnic. The choice was not random. Chapultepec represented living history, from its ancient ahuehuete trees to the castle that was once home to emperors and presidents. For teenagers studying Mexican history from worn-out textbooks, walking where Maximilian once walked or seeing where the boy heroes fell would be an unforgettable experience. Besides, Professor Ramirez knew the park well. He had led previous groups there without a single incident. The group included the best students from the second year, selected not only for their grades but for their exemplary conduct. Cristina Mendoza, 13, with a 9.8 grade average, dreamed of being a doctor. Her mother sold quesadillas outside the school to pay for her supplies. The twins, Hector and Hugo Santana, 14, were mathematics geniuses who shared an academic excellence scholarship. Their father, a construction worker, boasted that his sons would be the first in the family to attend university. Alejandra Flores, 13, wrote poetry that was published in the school newspaper. The daughter of a widowed seamstress, she found an escape from a difficult reality in her words. Roberto Jimenez, 14, had won the State Knowledge Olympiad, a feat that filled the entire school with pride. Each one had dreams, families who adored them, and bright futures ahead. They came from humble homes but were raised with strong values. Their parents had made sacrifices to provide them with school supplies, clean uniforms, and the 50-peso fee for the trip. For many, it was the first time they would leave Iztapalapa for something other than a medical emergency or a funeral. The full list included 21 other equally outstanding teenagers. Monica Herrera, whose father would record everything with his camcorder, the cousins Raul and Sebastian Lopez, the inseparable Carmen, Patricia, and Sofia, known as the Three Musketeers for their unbreakable friendship, Eduardo Vargas, the group's jokester who kept everyone laughing, Ana Maria Delgado, shy but brilliant in science, and others whose names would be etched onto a plaque that would never be placed in a memorial that would never be built. Chapultepec Park was then, as it is now, the most important urban park in Latin America. Spanning 686 hectares divided into 3 sections, it received millions of visitors annually. On Sundays, it filled with families carrying picnic baskets, couples in boats on the lake, and children running between the centuries-old trees. Thursdays were special days with free admission to museums, attracting school trips from all over the city. But 1991 was also a time of turbulent change in the capital. The city was growing uncontrollably, its population already exceeding 15 million. Security was deteriorating with rising unemployment and a looming economic crisis. Urban legends began to circulate about disappearances in public places, about children stolen from street markets, about vans lurking near schools. However, Chapultepec was still considered safe, especially during the day and in the most frequented areas. It was unthinkable that anything bad could happen in the city's green lung, patrolled by mounted police and forest rangers. Professor Ramirez was meticulous in his planning. 2 weeks prior, he sent out circulars detailing the itinerary, requesting signed permission slips, and holding meetings with parents. He explained every aspect of the trip. They would leave at 7 a.m., arrive at Chapultepec at 8:30, visit the castle, go down to the lake, have lunch in the Constituyentes area, and finish at the zoo. The return was scheduled for 5 p.m. Everything was timed, everything was planned. He requested parent volunteers to chaperone, a requirement from the school administration for large groups. 5 parents signed up, more than the required 3. Among them was Don Manuel Herrera, an electrician by trade and Monica's father. He had just bought a high-8 camcorder, the pride of the family, which he had paid for in 12 monthly installments. It was the first video camera on his block, and he took it to every important event. This excursion, which his daughter was attending on academic merit, definitely qualified as a moment to immortalize. The night before the trip, mothers prepared special lunches, Milanesa sandwiches, ham and cheese, beans with chorizo. They included fruit, cookies, and juice pouches. Some parents gave their children extra money for a treat, perhaps cotton candy or a souvenir from the castle. The kids packed their backpacks with notebooks for taking notes, their student IDs, and their school sweaters, just in case it got chilly. The morning of June 6th dawned clear with the bright sun typical of the city before the afternoon rains. The 25 students, 3 teachers, and 5 parent chaperones gathered punctually at 7 a.m. in the school courtyard. The boys wore their dress uniforms, gray trousers, pristine white shirts, and navy blue sweaters with the school's embroidered crest. The girls wore gray pleated skirts, white blouses, blue sweaters, and white knee-high socks. All had on well-polished black shoes, their hair neatly styled. They boarded a rented bus from the Turismo Aguila line, which had been inspected and had all its papers in order. The driver, Don Roberto, was known to the school. He had driven for previous excursions. Seats were assigned, teachers and parents at the front, girls in the middle, and boys at the back. Don Manuel began recording from that moment. The goodbyes, the mother's blessings from behind the school gate, the excited faces peering through the bus windows. Everything was normal. Everything was happy. Everything was filled with the beautiful anticipation of a special day to come. The bus entered the park through the Reforma entrance, the busiest and most emblematic. Enormous ahuehuete trees shaded vendors selling balloons, photographers with cardboard ponies, and stalls of traditional sweets. The contrast with Iztapalapa was stark. Here, everything seemed greener, cleaner, more orderly. The kids pressed their faces against the windows, pointing out the swans on the lake, the squirrels in the trees, the elegant morning joggers. Don Manuel had changed his camera's battery and put in a new 2-hour tape. He started recording the moment they got off the bus. Professor Ramirez gave his final instructions, reminding them to stay together, respect the facilities, and represent their school with dignity. The students lined up by height, backpacks slung over their shoulders, a mixture of school discipline and teenage excitement. The camera captured the typical jokes, Hugo Santana pretending to faint from the effort of walking, Eduardo Vargas mimicking the professor's voice, the girls' nervous laughter. The plan was to walk along the main causeway towards the castle, go up the vehicle ramp to avoid excessive fatigue, visit the museum halls, have a snack on the terraces overlooking the city, and then come down the main staircase for a group photo. Everything was perfectly planned, just like all of Professor Ramirez's previous trips. The visit to Chapultepec Castle went off without a hitch. The students were impressed by the majesty of the place. The rooms with period furniture, the stained glass windows, the portraits of Maximilian and Carlota. The professor used each room to give a living lecture. Here, they conspired against Madero. Through this window, the boy heroes jumped. From this office, Don Porfirio governed. The students took diligent notes for their reports, knowing it would count towards their final grade. Don Manuel recorded selectively to save battery. Moments in the historic halls where light streamed through the windows, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Panoramic views from the terraces where the city stretched out until it disappeared into the haze. Groups of friends posing in front of O'Gorman's murals. Cristina Mendoza and Alejandra Flores writing intently in their notebooks, always the most dedicated. On the main terrace, while the students ate their snacks, a few castle guards approached to chat. One of them, an older man with years of service, told them anecdotes about famous visitors, about the ghosts that supposedly roamed the halls. The students listened, fascinated, especially when he mentioned that on full moon nights, you could still hear Carlota's footsteps as she searched for Maximilian. Everything was normal, all part of the educational and cultural experience Professor Ramirez had promised. As they descended from the castle towards the lake area, the atmosphere subtly changed. Where before there had been scattered tourists and street vendors, they now noticed an unusual presence of supposed park rangers. They wore uniforms that looked official, beige shirts, olive green pants, and caps with the Chapultepec logo. But there was something odd about their behavior. Instead of general surveillance, they were specifically observing school groups, taking notes in small pads, and speaking constantly into handheld radios. Professor Ramirez noticed, but he attributed it to some special operation. Perhaps there was an important event that day, some official visiting the park. It wasn't unusual for security to be increased without notice. Besides, more surveillance meant more safety for his students. They continued walking towards the lake, where they planned to take photos on the iconic bridges and perhaps, if the budget allowed, take a ride in a rowboat. The kids were happy, pointing at the ducks, buying seeds for the pigeons with the pesos they had. Don Manuel continued to record spontaneous moments. Roberto Jimenez explaining the local flora to his classmates, the Santana twins competing to see who could spot the most squirrels. The girls braiding each other's hair under the shade of the ahuehuete trees. No one could imagine that in less than 2 hours these innocent moments captured on video would become the last known images of the 25 teenagers in freedom. Near the audiorama, as the group headed towards the Constituyentes area where they planned to eat lunch, one of the uniformed guards approached Professor Ramirez directly. The man was in his 40s with a robust build and the natural authority that comes from years of wearing a uniform. His name tag identified him as Zone Supervisor J. Hernandez. He spoke in a professional but urgent tone. He informed the professor of a security problem in the area where they planned to eat. According to his explanation, there had been an altercation between street vendors and the mounted police. Nothing serious, he assured them, but it was best to avoid the area while things calmed down. As a public servant concerned for the well-being of visitors, especially minors, he suggested an alternative area, a quieter, safer spot in the second section of the park. He even offered to guide them personally to ensure they arrived without any trouble. Professor Ramirez hesitated for a moment. He didn't like changing plans, but the students' safety was his priority. He quickly consulted with the other teachers and parent chaperones. Don Manuel, from the back of the group, was still recording and captured the conversation. The decision was unanimous. It was better to avoid any potential problems. They accepted Supervisor Hernandez's guidance. Don Manuel's video shows the crucial moment with chilling clarity. The group was led down less traveled paths, supposedly a shortcut to picnic tables reserved for school groups. Supervisor Hernandez walked at the front, conversing amiably with Professor Ramirez about the park's history, earning his trust with his knowledge and apparent professionalism. 2 more guards had discreetly joined them, flanking the group. An extra precaution, they explained. The students began to notice they were straying from the familiar paths. A few murmured their concerns. The typical buzz of the park had vanished. There were no other visitors in sight. The trails grew narrower, but the authority of the uniforms and the professor's trust kept them moving forward. Cristina Mendoza, ever observant, remarked to her friend Alejandra that something felt wrong. She was silenced with a "don't be a coward" from Eduardo Vargas, though the video shows him glancing around nervously as well. When they reached a clearing surrounded by dense trees, they found not the promised picnic tables but more guards and 3 vans, each bearing the official logos of the Mexico City government. The scene was perfectly staged. Radios crackled with supposed reports. Uniformed men moved with an air of official urgency. It was a deployment that felt chillingly legitimate. Supervisor Hernandez, his tone now more authoritarian, announced that there was an emergency situation in the park and that, per protocol, they needed to evacuate the minors. The events unfolded with military precision. The fake guards began separating the students from the adults, citing emergency safety protocols. They explained that the children would be taken to a seeker assembly point at the main entrance, while a bomb threat was investigated in the castle area. Right where they had been hours before, the teachers and parents would be escorted along a different route, longer but equally safe. The authority of the uniforms, the radios with their official-sounding codes, the vehicles with government plates. It all seemed devastatingly real. When Professor Ramirez voiced doubts about splitting up the group, he was pressured with arguments about legal responsibility, about what would happen if the threat was real and they didn't act fast. They even showed him a supposed evacuation order with seals that looked official. Don Manuel, growing more nervous by the second, kept his camera rolling. The video shows the 25 students being lined up and directed towards the 3 vans. Some look frightened. Monica Herrera scans the crowd for her father. The Santana twins hold hands. Others try to stay calm with nervous jokes. Eduardo Vargas says something that earns a weak laugh from his classmates. The teachers, Maria Elena and Susana, try to soothe the younger girls, assuring them that everything will be fine, that it's just a precaution. The most heart-wrenching moment in the video is when Cristina Mendoza, as she climbs into one of the vans, turns back towards the adults. Her face is a mixture of fear and a silent plea, as if her instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong, but her upbringing, to obey authority, compelled her to get in. Alejandra Flores, behind her, has tears in her eyes. Roberto Jimenez, always analytical, appears to be memorizing details, perhaps already suspicious. It was the last image of them alive. The adults were led in the opposite direction by 2 guards who maintained constant radio contact, creating the illusion of a legitimate, coordinated operation. They were guided down trails that, they were promised, led to another secure exit near Los Pinos. Along the way, the guards kept up a monologue about the seriousness of the threat, about past bomb scares in public places, about the importance of following protocol to the letter. After walking for about 20 minutes, they reached an area near the perimeter wall. The guards told them to wait there, that vehicles would arrive soon to take them to the assembly point with the children. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. Professor Ramirez, increasingly agitated, began to question the situation. When he tried to use one of the guards' radios to make contact, the man simply brushed him off with evasive answers. At the 20-minute mark, without any explanation, the 2 guards simply turned and walked away quickly. Professor Ramirez ran after them, shouting, demanding answers. The men picked up their pace and disappeared into the trees. It was in that moment of absolute silence, standing in the middle of the woods with no idea where they were, that the horrible truth struck them like a sledgehammer. They had been deceived. The 25 students were not being evacuated. They had been taken. A controlled panic erupted among the group of adults. They split up. Some ran in the direction they thought the main entrance was, others deeper into the woods searching for the vans. Don Manuel continued to film the frantic search. The video shows chaotic images dashing through trees, shouts echoing with names. Cristina, Roberto, Monica, answer me! Professor Ramirez, normally so composed, looks shattered, running aimlessly, stumbling and pushing himself back up. They found other park visitors who had seen no evacuation, no emergency. Real Chapultepec guards, identifiable by different badges and slightly different uniforms, knew nothing of any bomb threat, of any emergency protocol activated that day. Every person they asked solidified the horrible certainty. There was no threat, no evacuation, no secure assembly point. 25 teenagers had vanished in broad daylight from the most public place in Mexico. The search grew more desperate. Parents and teachers fanned out across the park, questioning vendors, other visitors, anyone who might have seen something. Don Manuel recorded these moments too. The faces of strangers, looking on with pity and horror as they told them no, they hadn't seen a group of students. They hadn't noticed any official vans. Chapultepec Park, with its hundreds of acres, its thousands of trees, its dozens of exits, had swallowed 25 teenagers without a trace. 25 bright students disappeared from the most public place in Mexico in broad daylight. If this outrages you as much as it does us, share this video now. Comment if you remember this case or if you know of other disappearances in public places. The truth the video reveals is even more shocking. At 2:30 p.m., Professor Ramirez and three parents ran to the main police booth inside the park, located near the main lake. The officers on duty, two young agents who seemed more concerned with their game of dominoes than their jobs, met the story with utter disbelief. 25 students missing in Chapultepec? Impossible. They were probably just lost, playing somewhere. They'd turn up. Teenagers were like that, irresponsible, probably just skipping out. The professor, sweating and his voice cracking, insisted on the gravity of the situation. He explained about the fake guards, the official vehicles, the separation of the group. The police exchanged annoyed glances. One of them took out a notepad and began writing lethargically, constantly interrupting with questions that seemed more aimed at assigning blame than starting a search. Why did they change their planned route? Why did they trust strangers? Were they sure the students hadn't planned this themselves? Don Manuel, who had arrived with another group of parents, showed the officers parts of the video. On the camera's small screen, the final moments before the separation, the supposed guards, the vans, were all clearly visible. Even with visual evidence, the officers downplayed the situation. They suggested it was probably an elaborate prank, a misunderstanding, that the guards were likely real and the children would turn up at any moment at one of the park's entrances. The golden hours to locate the children were lost to bureaucracy and disbelief. The police insisted they had to wait, that they couldn't declare an emergency without being certain, that alerting the entire force for what was surely a misunderstanding would cause unnecessary panic. It wasn't until 6:00 p.m., 4.5 hours after the disappearance, that a higher-ranking officer arrived and ordered a formal search operation to begin. At 7:00 p.m., as the sun began to set, the Aguila tour bus began the most painful return journey imaginable. The vehicle that had left that morning filled with laughter and song, that was supposed to return with 25 tired but happy teenagers, now carried only 8 broken adults. Don Roberto, the driver, drove with tears streaming down his cheeks. In the empty seats, a few forgotten backpacks remained. Silent witnesses to the tragedy. Back at Technical High School 47, a group of mothers had been waiting since 5:00 p.m., the scheduled return time. At first, they weren't worried about the delay. The city's traffic was unpredictable. Some joked that the kids had probably convinced the professor to stay a little longer. Maria Mendoza, Cristina's mother, had prepared hibiscus tea and quesadillas for when her daughter arrived, hungry from the trip. When the bus finally appeared at 7:30 p.m. and only the adults began to disembark, an unnatural silence fell over the schoolyard. The mothers stared, uncomprehending, hoping it was a joke, that the kids would burst out laughing from the back of the bus. When Professor Ramirez, his face a mask of grief, began to speak, the reality struck them like a black wave. Maria Mendoza was the first to fall. She fainted, her body hitting the concrete as other mothers rushed to her side. The screams began soon after, animal cries of pain, of mothers calling for their children as if they could materialize them with the force of their love. Roberto Jimenez's father, a quiet man who worked as a mechanic, began punching the school wall until his knuckles bled, repeating "no, no, no" like a broken mantra. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Within minutes, dozens of neighbors arrived at the school, family, friends, the curious, all wanting to know, none wanting to believe. Spontaneous groups organized to go to Chapultepec that very night with flashlights, sticks, whatever they could find. If the police wouldn't look for their children, they would. By 9:00 p.m., nearly 200 people from the Iztapalapa district had descended on Chapultepec. They entered through different gates, some jumping walls, determined to comb every inch of the park. They carried school photos of the missing, shouting their names into the darkness, shining makeshift lights into the undergrowth. It was a hellish scene. Desperate fathers tripping over roots, mothers scratched by branches, younger siblings crying with fear and confusion. The police, who had taken hours to react, now acted with arrogance. They began to drive the families away, claiming they were interfering with the official investigation. An investigation that clearly didn't exist. There were confrontations. Parents who refused to leave without their children were met by police who responded with batons. Don Manuel, still with his camera, tried to record these abuses but was threatened with arrest if he didn't leave. Chapultepec Park, beautiful by day, became terrifying at night. Its 686 hectares were a dark labyrinth where any shadow could be a body, any sound a cry for help. The parents were not prepared for this. They stumbled, got lost, hurt themselves, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the anguish of not knowing where their children were. The next morning, June 7th, officials from the Mexico City Department held a press conference at their central offices. The Undersecretary of Public Security, a man in an impeccable suit who had never set foot in Iztapalapa, read a statement that was an insult to the family's intelligence and grief. The official version was obscene in its simplicity. The students had likely run away voluntarily. It was common, according to the official, for teenagers to use field trips as an opportunity to escape. He suggested there might have been a pact among them, a poorly planned teenage adventure. They would soon turn up, ashamed and repentant. The families should wait at home, not create unnecessary panic. When journalists pressed them about the fake guards and the vehicles described by witnesses, the response was blunt. There was no record of such an operation in the official files. Therefore, it had not happened. The uniforms described did not match any official corps. The vehicles with DF government logos had not been assigned to Chapultepec that day. If there were no records, there was no crime. Don Manuel's video was dismissed as inconclusive. An image consultant even suggested it could have been edited, that the quality was too poor to identify anything with certainty. When Don Manuel offered to hand over the original tape for analysis, he was told it wasn't necessary. The children would surely turn up before that kind of evidence was needed. But the most perverse part was the subtle smear campaign that began that same day. Insinuations about domestic problems in the missing children's families, suggestions that some students were bad influences, theories about mass runaways motivated by teen pregnancies or drug problems. It was all designed to deflect attention from the central fact. 25 minors had been abducted from the most heavily guarded park in Mexico, and the authorities preferred to deny it rather than investigate. The months following the disappearance were a Dantean ordeal for the families. They organized into a committee, electing Maria Mendoza as their spokesperson for her ability to maintain her composure in front of the cameras despite the grief that was consuming her. Every Thursday, they marched in front of the DF government offices carrying their children's school photos, demanding answers that never came. The media covered the first few marches but soon lost interest. 1991 was a complicated year for Mexico. The city was preparing for major political changes. There were corruption scandals that sold more newspapers than 25 missing teenagers from a working-class neighborhood. The families did not give up. They plastered posters on every pole on Reforma Avenue, at every metro entrance, in every market. The smiling faces of the 25 stared out from crumbling walls, reminding the city of its failure. But the posters were systematically torn down, sometimes by authorities citing visual pollution, other times by citizens tired of being reminded of other people's tragedies. Don Manuel became an obsessed man. He spent entire days in front of rented editing machines trying to improve the video's quality. He copied the tape dozens of times in different formats: VHS, Betamax, even the emerging digital format. He distributed copies to every television station, newspaper, and magazine. A few clips surfaced on late-night local news. 5-minute segments buried in the dead of night, seen by no one. They lacked the impact needed to reopen the case. By 1993, the Committee of Families had dwindled by half. Some parents were consumed by their sorrow, their bodies giving out long before their grief did. The Santana twins' father suffered a fatal heart attack on the second anniversary of their disappearance. Others separated, their marriages shattered by the weight of pain and blame. Many of the missing children's siblings developed psychological problems, growing up in homes where absence was a palpable, suffocating presence. Technical High School 47 was never the same. Professor Ramirez, at his own request, was transferred. He couldn't bear to enter the classroom where the 25 had once studied. He tried to take early retirement, but his request was denied. He ended his career teaching with a bottle of liquor hidden in his desk, his eyes constantly drifting to the door, as if he expected his lost students to walk in at any moment, apologizing for being late. In 1995, a flicker of hope pierced the gloom. Miguel Ángel Rodriguez, an independent journalist known for tackling impossible cases, took up the Chapultepec disappearance. For months, he pursued leads others had dismissed. He interviewed park employees who remembered seeing suspicious vehicles that day, witnesses who had been silenced. He unearthed archival photographs showing vans similar to those described. Rodriguez made a series of crucial breakthroughs. The uniforms of the fake guards, when analyzed frame by frame from the video, didn't match any official agency from 1991. They did, however, match uniforms that had been seized in raids on criminal organizations. He also discovered that vehicles similar to those used in the abduction had been reported in other disappearances. Children stolen from street markets, teenagers who never made it home from factory jobs, cases that were consistently downplayed by the authorities. The journalist began to piece together a terrifying pattern, a network operating with absolute impunity across Mexico City, specializing in children from humble families, those with the fewest resources to pressure the system. The choice of Chapultepec wasn't random. It was a brazen display of power, a statement that they could operate in the most public of places without consequence. The 25 from Technical High School 47 were not the only victims. They were just one part of something much, much larger. Rodriguez shared his preliminary findings with a few of the families, rekindling a hope they thought long dead. Finally, someone was taking their pain seriously. He promised them his report, set to be published in a respected investigative journal, would force the authorities to act. He had recorded interviews, documents, proof of an official cover-up. It would be impossible to ignore. On September 15, 1995, 2 days before the article was scheduled to be published, Miguel Ángel Rodriguez died in a car crash on the highway to Cuernavaca. A cargo truck struck him head-on. The driver fled the scene and was never found. The tapes and documents in his car vanished. His editor received threats and decided to pull the story. Another door slammed shut. Another hope extinguished. By June 6, 2001, the 10th anniversary of the disappearance, only 15 families were still actively searching. Natural causes had claimed several of the elderly parents. Some siblings had emigrated to the United States, fleeing a city of painful memories. Others had simply surrendered to the brutal reality. Their children were not coming back. The system was not going to help them. The pain was never going to end. Maria Mendoza, her hair now completely white, remained the soul of the movement. Every June 6th, she organized a mass at the neighborhood church. Afterwards, she would lead anyone who wished to join her to Chapultepec. They would stand on the exact spot where the video showed the children for the last time. They would lay flowers, light candles, and pray. Some of the veteran park guards knew her, greeting her with a respectful nod, allowing her this ritual of grief. That 10th anniversary was especially difficult. A decade without answers, without bodies to bury, without the mercy of closure. The younger siblings of the disappeared, now adults themselves, shared heartbreaking stories. Homes where birthdays and holidays were no longer celebrated, because any joy felt like a betrayal. Parents who kept their children's rooms untouched, waiting for an impossible return. Mothers who still set an extra plate at the dinner table. Don Manuel Herrera died on March 23, 2008, after years of physical and mental decline. His obsession with the video had consumed him. His final years were spent hunched over borrowed computers, trying to digitally enhance the grainy images, convinced there were clues he had missed. His family would find him at 3 in the morning, pausing and replaying the same few seconds, whispering names, begging his daughter's forgiveness for failing to protect her. His funeral was small and intimate, attended by the few families who still kept in touch, forever bound by their shared tragedy. His wife, in an act of both grief and liberation, decided to sell all the belongings that reminded her of that time. This included boxes upon boxes of tapes, copies, and transcriptions, the entire obsessive archive of a broken father. She didn't know that among those boxes was the original tape, the single clearest piece of evidence of what happened that day in Chapultepec. And so, the video ended up in a lot of electronics sold to a reseller who sold it to another until it landed in that Polanco auction house in 2024. A treasure trove of truth, lost among electronic waste, waiting to be rediscovered by a generation that barely remembered the case, if they remembered it at all. 33 years of pain for 25 destroyed families. What the full video reveals about the operation is chilling. The auction house employee who found the tape was a 28-year-old with a passion for vintage technology. At first, he put the tape in hoping to find something quirky for his social media feed. An 80s wedding, a family party, something with the nostalgic aesthetic that generated so much engagement. The first few minutes were disappointing, just a typical school field trip. He almost turned it off, but something about the date stopped him. June 6, 1991. The date sounded familiar. A quick Google search sent a chill down his spine. 25 students disappeared. Chapultepec 1991 returned thousands of results. Conspiracy pages, unsolved crime forums, blogs from family members who were still searching. The case of the Iztapalapa 25 was one of Mexico City's dark urban legends. A story everyone had heard at some point, but which had become almost mythical over time. And he was holding the original evidence in his hands. He continued watching, now with a new, horrifying perspective. Every teenage face that appeared on screen was a missing person. Every laugh, every joke, every mundane moment was now weighted with tragedy. When he reached the final 40 minutes, he had to pause several times. Watching them being deceived, separated, and herded into the vans, all with the innocence of not knowing they were being filmed, was devastating. The video was first sent to a private digital forensics lab. The technology of 2024 allowed for processes that were impossible in 1991. Digital restoration didn't just improve the image quality, it unearthed details hidden in the shadows, reflections the original camera had barely caught. Every frame was analyzed, stabilized, and enhanced. The results were staggering. Reflected in the window of one of the vans was a partial license plate, DP71. In another moment, as the camera panned accidentally to the side, it captured a previously unidentified sixth man, supervising from a distance. He was speaking into a different kind of radio, clearly the operations coordinator. His face, though blurry, had distinct features. A scar on his left cheek, a slender build, approximately 1.8 meters tall. The audio also revealed its secrets. When amplified and digitally cleaned, background conversations could be heard. At one point, one of the fake guards says clearly, The boss says to take them to the Tlalpan warehouse. Another replies, all of them. That's a lot. The chilling response, all of them. We already have buyers waiting. These conversations, inaudible in 1991, confirmed what the families had always suspected. This was a human trafficking operation. Facial recognition software cross-referencing government databases identified 3 of the 6 men visible in the video. The results were disturbing not only for who they were, but for their connections. The first, the man who had introduced himself as Supervisor Hernandez, was actually Joaquin Morales Chedillo, a former judicial police officer dishonorably discharged in 1989 for ties to drug trafficking. His record showed arrests for extortion, kidnapping, and human trafficking, though he was mysteriously released each time due to lack of evidence. He was executed in 2003 in Iztapalapa, his body found with signs of torture, an apparent casualty of an internal criminal feud. The second was Roberto El Chilango Vasquez, identified in federal files as an enforcer for the Juarez cartel. According to intelligence reports, his specialty was transporting human cargo from the center of the country to the northern border. He was captured in 1998 and murdered in the Puente Grande prison 3 months later, before he could testify in a federal case. The third and most unsettling was identified as Carlos Dominguez Soto. He was listed as an official employee of Seguridad Ejecutiva S.A., a private security firm that provided bodyguards to high-level politicians. The company, which had been only superficially investigated, held multi-million-dollar contracts with the Mexico City government. Dominguez vanished in 1996, right around the time another journalist began looking into the disappearances. The frame-by-frame analysis revealed an operation of military precision. This was not an improvised kidnapping. It was a meticulously planned hunt. The perpetrators knew the exact procedures for school field trips, the typical schedules, common routes, and security protocols. They knew the teachers would trust official-looking uniforms, that the parents would obey orders that seemed to come from a place of authority. At least 3 additional lookouts were identified in the video, blended in with the normal park visitors. One pretended to sell balloons near the castle. Another sat on a bench reading a newspaper, his eyes clearly scanning the group. A third walked parallel to the students, maintaining a constant distance. The network was far larger than anyone had imagined. One chilling detail emerged. As the students were being separated, one of the criminals consulted a list. He made check marks as the children were loaded into the vans, as if verifying an inventory. Digital enhancement revealed partial names: Men, Mendoza, Santana. They had specific information about who these children were. It was not a random selection. It was a targeted harvest. By cross-referencing the video's information with documented cases from the era, forensic analysts and criminologists came to a devastating conclusion about the probable fate of the 25. The modus operandi perfectly matched human trafficking networks that operated in the 90s, networks that thrived on systemic corruption and the vulnerability of poor families. The victims' ages, 12 to 14, placed them in the ideal range for multiple forms of exploitation. The 14 girls were likely trafficked for sexual exploitation, possibly to the United States or Central America, where criminal networks ran clandestine brothels. The 11 boys could have met several fates: forced labor in agricultural fields, forced recruitment into low-level criminal activities, or sexual exploitation as well. The mention of buyers waiting in the audio suggested the children were already sold before they were even taken. Trafficking rings often worked on commission. Clients would request specific profiles: age, gender, appearance, and the criminals would fill the order. The Chapultepec operation could have been the fulfillment of multiple accumulated orders. The most disturbing part of the analysis was not the identification of the direct perpetrators, but the implications of their connections. The presence of private security personnel with ties to politicians, the ease with which they operated in Mexico's most heavily guarded park, the swiftness of the official cover-up, it all pointed to complicity at the highest levels of the city government. The pattern of silencing was undeniable. The journalist murdered in 1995, witnesses who disappeared or changed their stories, evidence that was conveniently lost. This wasn't incompetence, it was an active cover-up. Someone with a great deal of power had a great deal to lose if the truth ever came out. One private investigator who reviewed the case suggested that Chapultepec itself may have been a regular operational hub for these networks. Its vast size, multiple entrances and exits, and massive crowds made it the perfect place to go unnoticed. The 25 from Iztapalapa were likely not the only ones, just the only ones ever documented on video. The only time the operation was caught on camera. The rediscovery of the video in October 2024 created a media tsunami. For the first time in decades, the case of the Chapultepec 25 was a national headline. Social media exploded with the hashtag #HatcherJusticeForThe25. Major news networks led their broadcasts with the story. True crime influencers dedicated entire streams to analyzing the video frame by frame. The public pressure forced the Mexico City Attorney General's office to formally reopen the case. A special unit was assigned with seemingly unlimited resources. The lead prosecutor, Alejandra Gutierrez, promised in a press conference that this time would be different, that modern technology and political will would finally deliver answers. They were beautiful words, words the surviving families had heard too many times before. The team began by re-interviewing every living witness. Professor Ramirez, now 75 and living in a nursing home, wept for hours as he watched the restored video. It unlocked details he had long forgotten. One of the fake guards had a northern accent. Another walked with a slight limp. The man who seemed to be the leader wore a distinctive ring on his pinky finger. Each recovered memory was another piece of the puzzle. A retired teacher, Esperanza Ruiz, who had remained silent for 33 years out of fear, finally broke her silence. She revealed that days before the field trip, a well-dressed man had visited the school asking about extracurricular activities. He claimed to be from a foundation that wanted to donate resources for cultural outings. He asked specific questions. How many students typically participated? What were the selection criteria? What routes did they usually take? She had, in her innocence, shared everything, including the details of the already planned trip to Chapultepec. The school's janitor, Don Ruben, now 89 years old, made a heartbreaking confession. A week before the trip, a man had offered him 500 pesos for information about the excursion, a list of students, exact schedules, a planned route. The pay was more than he made in a month. He accepted the job, thinking perhaps they wanted to sell something to the parents or maybe take school photos. He never imagined its true purpose. For 33 years, he had lived with that guilt. Twice he had tried to end his own life. Other disturbing testimonies began to surface. A candy vendor in Chapultepec Park recalled seeing the vans days before parked at different points, as if they were studying the routes. A retired police officer admitted that on that very morning, his unit had received orders not to patrol Sector 3, the precise location where the abduction took place. When he asked why, he was told a special operation was underway and that they were not to interfere. But the most shocking testimony came from a protected witness, identified only as Juan. A former member of a criminal network, now in a protection program, he confirmed what everyone had long suspected but no one could ever prove. In the 90s, several criminal organizations operated with total impunity in Mexico City, shielded by corrupt authorities. Child trafficking was a lucrative business with clients in Mexico and abroad willing to pay a fortune. According to Juan, Chapultepec Park was a regular hunting ground. The sheer number of vulnerable children visiting daily, the multiple exits, the ease of blending into the crowds, it made the park a perfect venue. Normally, they would fish for one or two lost or distracted children. But the case of the 25 was different. It was a large order placed by a powerful client who wanted an entire group for a purpose Juan refused to specify, but the implications were nauseating. He revealed that after the success of the Chapultepec operation, they tried to repeat it in Xochimilco months later. But something went wrong. They clashed with honest police officers. Several criminals were killed. After that, they returned to smaller, less risky operations. For these networks, the Iztapalapa 25 had been the score of the century, a story bragged about in the criminal underworld for years. Of the 50 original parents, only 7 were still alive in 2024. Maria Mendoza, now 78, had become a symbol of resistance. When she saw the restored video of her daughter Cristina getting into the van, she wept in a way she hadn't in decades. "It's as if it happened yesterday," she told the media. "The pain never goes away. You just learn to walk with it." The siblings of the disappeared, now adults between 45 and 55, formed their own association, Brothers of the 25. Many had lived lives scarred by the tragedy. Luis Jimenez, the younger brother of Roberto, never married or had children. "How could I start a family," he explained, "when mine was destroyed?" He dedicated his life to investigating disappearances, becoming a fierce activist. Other siblings shared stories of broken homes, of parents who never recovered from the loss, who died calling out for their missing children. Marriages were shattered by grief and blame. Surviving siblings grew up as ghosts in their own homes, their needs ignored by parents, consumed by absence. Entire generations marked by a single day in Chapultepec. The modern investigation revealed chilling connections to the present day. Roberto Jimenez Jr., the nephew of the brilliant missing student and now an independent investigator himself, had documented a disturbing pattern. Between 1985 and 1995, at least 40 cases of mass disappearances involving 5 or more minors occurred in public spaces across Mexico City. Most were never seriously investigated. The modus operandi was strikingly similar. The use of authority figure disguises, the selection of victims from low-income families, and operations staged in crowded places where no one would suspect a thing. The cases were concentrated in specific zones: Iztapalapa, Tláhuac, Xochimilco, the poorest boroughs where families had fewer resources to pressure the system. More disturbing still, some of the politicians and businessmen tangentially connected to the security companies involved back then were still active in 2024. They had climbed the ladder. They were now senators, deputies, corporate owners. The network of protection that enabled the crime in 1991 had merely evolved, adapted, and survived. The video proves what the families always knew. This was a planned mass abduction. Share this video so it can reach someone who might have information. Comment if you remember other similar cases from that era. After 33 years, every clue counts. As of today, the case of the Chapultepec 25 remains technically open but with no substantial progress. The direct perpetrators identified in the video are long dead, executed by their own accomplices or by the simple passage of time. The likely masterminds remain protected by statutes of limitation, political power, or death itself. The families are left with the bitter satisfaction of finally having what they always knew officially recognized. It wasn't a collective runaway, it was an organized mass kidnapping. The prosecutor's office has promised results by the end of 2024. But the families have learned not to hope. They have seen too many broken promises, too many investigations that begin with a flourish only to end up in forgotten filing cabinets. The system that allowed the crime in 1991 has changed its names and faces, but its essence remains. The poor are disposable, their tragedies are statistics, and their pain is invisible until a video makes it go viral. A commemorative plaque has been proposed for the exact spot in Chapultepec where the 25 were last seen, but it faces endless bureaucratic resistance. It's as if acknowledging that 25 teenagers were abducted from Mexico's most iconic park would be admitting an unforgivable failure of the state, a stain on the city's tourist-friendly image. It is easier to maintain the silence, to hope that time will erase what justice could not resolve. Technical High School 47, however, keeps its promise. Every June 6th, without fail, current teachers and students hold a ceremony. An altar with 25 photographs stands in the main courtyard. The students of today, born decades after the tragedy, stand as a guard of honor. They read the names, the ages, the truncated dreams. They never met them, but they know them. Cristina, who wanted to be a doctor. Roberto, the math genius. Alejandra, the poet. And all the others. This is the only justice they have ever received, to not be forgotten by their school, by their community. Don Manuel's video now circulates freely on the internet, impossible to silence as it was in 1991. Every view is a testimony, every share, a demand for justice. New generations watch it with horror and disbelief. How could this have happened? How could they have covered it up? What they don't understand is that in the Mexico of the 90s, with no social media, no transparency, no real mechanisms for accountability, making 25 lives disappear was as easy as making 25 case files disappear. Don Manuel's home video, filmed with a father's love and recovered by chance 33 years later, did more than just document the disappearance of 25 bright teenagers in the heart of Mexico City. It exposed the vulnerability of the most innocent, even in the most public of places. Their disappearance from Chapultepec was not an inexplicable mystery, but an organized crime that relied on the complicity of official silence. Today, that video is the indelible testimony that 25 dreams were stolen one June morning, in a park where millions have made happy memories, unaware that it also holds the memory of one of the most atrocious crimes against children in Mexico's history. This story cannot be forgotten again. If you believe these families deserve justice, subscribe right now. Next Friday, we will reveal another case the authorities tried to bury. Activate all notifications so you don't miss it. Comment with the name of a missing person you know so we can investigate their case. Share this video because every view is a step towards justice. This is your channel, where no one disappeared is forgotten and no crime is left unexposed. We'll see you on Friday, because as long as there is memory, there is hope for justice.